and the men from the Prince of Wales's company, which is the senior company of the 1st Battalion Welsh Guards, specially chosen for this onerous task. They're all over 6 foot tall, all of a similar height, and they've rehearsed this maneuver since they came together on Tuesday of this week. At their head, Captain Richard Williams, who won the MC in Cambodia in 1991. And they will now bear the coffin of the Princess of Wales into Westminster Abbey. The coffin lined with lead, so heavy, and the eyes of the world are on these men. Entering the Abbey gates, the Dean of Westminster leading. And the chief mourners behind. As London witnessed a more moving sight. Background, Big Ben strikes 11. And as it enters the Great West Door, all will stand for the national anthem.
part of the world where you often get hitchhikers trying to get a lift before the M1 begins. None of them today. There are no crowds here. The police have kept people off this particular stretch. I presume we're actually on motorway now. But this bit has been, oh yes, there's the familiar blue signs that tell us all, we all know them, you're on a motorway.
And we'll stay with the Princess until she disappears from our view onto the M1 motorway and north to Althorpe House in Northamptonshire. A brief stop to clear the flowers off. Yes, they had to do that. Obviously, looks covered in flowers. You can't go on a motorway with your car covered in flowers, whatever your car is. So a brief stop. Leave the flowers on the hard shoulder, and no doubt they'll remain.
Those men on the left-hand side, motorway workers, I bet they didn't expect this. Flowers off from the Princess's funeral, in a way, in front of them, and the little procession moves off again, up the M1 towards the final resting place in Northamptonshire.
And that'll be our final view of Princess Diana as she leaves North London for the journey north. For the moment, our final view.
Well, we're in their hands now. Hello. You going off? All right. I shouldn't be carrying on.
And we're back outside Buckingham Palace, where the crowds will not disperse. Climbing on the railings by the looks of it. Looking at the flowers, reading some of the messages. My goodness me, look at those flowers. I think a great sense of relief that it passed so well this morning. It went so well. As I said earlier, exactly the tribute that she deserved.
Lots of smiles in the crowd now.
Yes.
All the tears and sadness, there's a bit of smile, a bit of relief. That's so often the case at the end of a funeral, isn't it? Let's be honest about it. There is that relief. The grieving process requires the formality of a funeral. Now people beginning to relax, beginning, I suppose, the process of really believing that the princess has died. Flowers, that's Buckingham Palace, the flowers on the railings, the flowers the Queen herself looked at yesterday for the first time.
Westminster Abbey again, the bells still tolling. Richard Branson. And there's that wonderfully spruced up Great West door, gleaming clean.
The weather so perfect, if you can use that word in connection with a funeral. Forecast of possible showers this afternoon, but it remained as sunny as possible. It could possibly have been. What a day for What a day for those crowds. We will all remember this day, of course we will, but for those who were actually on the streets of London, what memories they're going to have.
Hyde Park, where the giant screens were, where the service was followed by thousands more than were able to hear it either in the Abbey or in the streets around it. And still not dispersing, as I said earlier, probably friendships made. And for the moment, we'll leave the crowds of London in the centre of the city and in the north of the city, and we'll join the Princess later on in her journey as she nears Althorpe House in Northamptonshire. But for the moment, back to Trevor MacDonald.
John, thank you very much. And as we said, we'll be returning to that commentary as the coffin is driven northwards towards Northampton. The service itself, as you would have seen, was a fitting tribute to a woman who in death brought the country together like no one else. It's already been described as a day of unforgettable images and sounds. The departure of the coffin from Kensington Palace, those haunting cries of grief as the coffin left Kensington Palace, the wreath which said in simple, boyish writing the word mummy, and the poignant sight of the Princes William and Harry walking behind the gun carriage. And then there was that emotional and uncompromising tribute to Diana from her brother during the service. He called her unique, complex, extraordinary, and irreplaceable. We can now hear some comment and reflection on the ceremony. Let's go now to Julia Somerville and her guests at Westminster Abbey. Julia?
Well, Trevor, I have with me Lord Steele, who was in the congregation throughout the service. Lord Steele, somebody just said to me that they thought that the people who'd organised the service had managed to pull off the impossible. Did you feel that?
I did. I thought it was a most genuinely moving service, and it managed to combine in an extraordinary way the popular and informal with the royal. And I've never been at an occasion like it, and I'll never forget it. It was a most remarkable occasion.
I think the, if you like, the most heartfelt, perhaps, moment was Lord Spencer's tribute to his sister, which was both tremendously fond and very, very personal, but he was also reaching out and, if you like, laying some blame. Did you feel that he was accurate in his targets?
I don't think he overstepped the mark. I thought it was a very, very well-judged tribute, and I think, as the Queen was saying in her broadcast yesterday, there's so many lessons to be learned, perhaps by some sections of the press, perhaps by the royal family themselves. I think we're going to see perhaps a more informal and approachable royal family in the future as a result of Diana's influence. But most important of all, I think, talking to the crowds as I was coming across from the House of Commons to the Abbey earlier, I hope that her life will have left behind some lessons of service and concern for causes that she stood for.
Today must have had a special poignancy for you because you were a Privy Councillor, were you not, at the time when Diana was just about to become engaged to the Prince of Wales?
That's right. I was one of the Privy Councillors called to the palace to approve the royal marriage. So I'd met her when she was 19 and about to enter into this extraordinarily strained and stressful public life.
Sir David Steele, Lord Steele, thank you very much indeed. Back to you now, Trevor.
From Julia Somerville, let's go now to Mark Webster in Hyde Park. Mark?
Well, here earlier, Trevor, tens of thousands of people, literally as far as the eye could see, were gathered, watching the whole service on two giant screens here. They were Diana's people, if you like, a rainbow Britain, young and old, black and white, from every corner of the country. They all came here and they all shared the experience together. Now, I have with me Claire and Helen. Perhaps I'll turn to Claire first. What did you think of the service, Claire?
I thought it was a very moving service. I hate to say I enjoyed it, but I did. It was what I needed. I wanted to be able to come up here and grieve and see the service.
You were saying earlier some of what Earl Spencer had to say you thought might be a bit political.
Yes, I felt when I was listening to it, it didn't feel like a speech I expected at a funeral, but I agreed with everything he said, and I can't see a better opportunity for him to say it. We all listened, we all agreed with him, and I think our best wishes to the young princes do go out. I hope that Diana's example will continue, yeah.
Helen, I'll turn to you now. What would you think, from your perspective?
Oh, I thought it was very exciting, and they had a reading in there. Mr. Blair read one that was read at my grandfather's funeral, and I thought it was quite upsetting, actually, but I felt sorry for the young princes.
Indeed. Okay, thank you. Back to Trevor.
Thank you, Mark. The cortege is now on the M1. There you can see the police outriders heading up the M1. We saw it make its way all the way through North London. And now this is actually beginning its journey to Northampton on the M1 motorway. Picking up speed now, heading for that journey up to the Spencer estate. The M1 unusually quiet, cleared by police, of course, for this procession up to Northampton. Just a very small party. As we heard, the princes will make their way by the royal train. All those flowers which were strewn on the car cleared away now for the journey up north. Just before we saw those pictures, we were talking to Mark Webster at Hyde Park. He's there now. Mark?
Indeed, I have with me from Portsmouth, Debbie, Christopher and Andy, who I know. What did you think of the service, Debbie?
I thought it was very moving. I've never experienced anything like it before in my life, and I'm glad I came up today because I felt it was the way that I could say goodbye to it. It was the only way I could get it out of my system.
Yes, you said you've been grieving all week, you've been crying a lot all week. Do you think it's helped?
It has helped, yeah. It didn't actually physically hit me until the coffin was removed from the gun carriage, and obviously that's when the realisation sunk in that she really had gone.
Christopher, what did you think?
Well, Elton John's rewrite of Candle in the Wind was very sad, and so was Earl Spencer's speech, and that was what made me cry. And then from then on I just couldn't stop crying, and that was it. And same as my mum, I had to come to get it out of my system.
Andy, it must have been the same for you. Terribly emotional experience.
It was very emotional, and as Christopher said, Candle in the Wind, and Earl Spencer's speech. Earl Spencer summed up the whole of the nation, I think, the whole of the country there with what he said.
Do you think his sentiment in particular, that the two princes should be left alone by the media, is something that everybody feels?
Yes, very much so. And the spontaneous applause that followed that, I think, summed up what everybody thought and what the country feels and how he managed to put it across.
Yes,
just
indeed.
wonderful.
I can turn back here. But, I mean, you were making the point, you thought it was a bit political, but obviously his point really is, let the princes have as normal an upbringing as they possibly can.
Yes, one of my neighbours on Sunday said to me, who is going to take them to Thorpe Park? And I think that's what really moved me. Yes, my children had those opportunities. I hope those boys have the chance to do things that children do.
Yes, for you who's had a very normal upbringing. Do you feel a lot of sympathy for the princes?
Yeah, I can't imagine being in their place and having to do things that they do, especially just after their mums died.
And what did you think of how they acquitted themselves today?
Well, I think they were very brave out there, because I don't think I could have done that.
I think it's only fair to turn to you, Christopher, and ask you exactly the same question. What did you think of those young lads out there today?
Well, my heart just goes out to them. I feel so sorry for them. Their mum done everything for them. And I don't think Charles will take them to Thorpe Park, but I think William will take Harry to the pictures and everything. But their dad will take them to some places, but not all the time like their mum did.
It's a thought from those people here, I say, have shared this extraordinary experience today. Trevor.
We heard how the service, thank you, Mark Webster, we heard how the service at Westminster this morning was a combination of so many things, of the public and the private, of people from all walks of life. Julia Somerville is talking to some of them now.
Trevor, I have with me Chris de Berg, who I think needs no further introduction. Chris, you were obviously in there. Tell me your feelings about the service.
Julia, that was one of the most extraordinary things I've ever been at or felt a part of. And the most moving moment for me was when Earl Spencer made his tribute to his sister. And outside the Abbey, we could hear the applause as everybody, the people power, showed itself again. And I heard the applause grow, and it came through the west door, up the aisle, and everybody started applauding within the Abbey, and it made your hair stand on end. It felt like the applause was going all the way up to Diana herself in her coffin. It was an expression of power and emotion, and at that point I lost it myself, but I've never heard people applauding in church like that, or certainly not at a funeral.
Lord Spencer's tribute to his sister was so incredibly heartfelt, and he was all the time reminding people about what a gift Diana herself had in dealing with people. Tell us how you first came to meet her.
I met her about 10 years ago when she got in touch with me about the Enniskillen disaster, and subsequently we've been in touch a lot. I remember various occasions, for example, when she came back from Argentina. The morning she got back, she wrote me a lovely note accepting an album, Beautiful Dreams, that I'd sent her, and she said at the end of the note, I could use some beautiful dreams right now. She was a very charismatic woman. She made you feel special, and she had that gift of making, it's like stardust on everybody that met her. She knew how to be a star in as much as she left something with you after she'd gone and moved away from you. She was an outstanding lady, and beautiful and vulnerable and everything that, we wanted to hold her.
Elements, of course, that are very strongly in Elton John's song, and the altered version of which we heard today. My impression was that came over incredibly powerful. Was it the same for you?
Absolutely, Julia. I was sitting a few yards away from him, and I reckon I was one of the few people in the church who, in the cathedral, who actually knew what he was going through. Shortly before I caught eye contact with him, and I gave him the thumbs up, and I said, to myself, good luck, Elton. And the words were gorgeous, and people were extremely moved at the end. I also felt then people wanted to applaud, because we actually heard people outside applauding, but it wasn't until after Earl Spencer's tribute to his sister that the applause really crashed through the cathedral.
It's a lovely idea that the world outside and the world inside were communicating like that.
It was like a wave of love coming through, and everybody inside, I can tell, were as moved as I was.
Well, Chris de Berg, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to come and talk to us today. Back to you, Trevor, now.
Thank you, Julia. Let's go to the cenotaph now and to our political editor, Mike Brunson. Mike, I suppose the pulse of normal life is returning there?
Yes, it is. Trevor, of course, this is the centre of political power, isn't it? But it has been the most extraordinary experience to stand here with the ordinary people today and to take part in that service, because this street, with all the normally connections with politics and so on, became an open-air abbey during that service, a huge open-air abbey all the way around here. And so 2,000 people in the abbey, 2 million people perhaps in this, what I call the open-air abbey. And it was extraordinary the way that it started with immense grief. As the service began, people were openly crying. I saw one young girl crying and then passing a tissue to an elderly security guard, for example. But I can also bear witness to what happened as being described by earlier comments, because people began then, the mood began to change, and it changed at the end of Elton John's song, because it was out here in the street that they applauded for the first time. Polite, reverential applause, if you like, but an acknowledgement of what Elton John's song had done for them, had given them strength. So that was where the applause had begun. But then, as Earl Spencer began to speak, his tribute out here in Whitehall was applauded no less than 4 times. First, when he said, "We want to thank God for Diana brightening our lives," even though he said God only gave you half a life. But then when he moved on to the part where he was starting to criticize the tabloid press, there was applause at that. First of all, when he said, why is it that they wanted to belittle Diana? Is it because they lack something themselves? It's so baffling. People applauded that. There was even bigger applause, though, when the Earl said that he made his promise to Diana when he said, "We won't allow the boys to suffer the anguish that he had to suffer." That was when the applause, quite spontaneous here, and I'm fascinated to hear that it was also that applause, spontaneous applause, outside the Abbey, which then welled up through the Abbey so that everybody was applauding at the same time.
Michael Brunson, thank you for those observations. Joining me in the studio now, we have Robert Lacey, of course, who has been talking to us earlier this morning, and Canon Stephen Oliver. Can you give me your impression of the service first, Canon Oliver?
Yes, this was no thin secular send-off, was it? This was a deeply religious service, and I think it was one that from the very moment that you got those great sentences from the prayer book, "I am the resurrection and the life," and so on, the bedrock of Christian faith was there. But it also managed to embrace so many other sensibilities. The moment when Elton John finished singing was one of those poignant moments. The reading that the Prime Minister did, I thought, was just wonderful. I mean, the way in which he captured that and gave it such energy and verve, right the way through to the moment that the Dean finally commended Diana to the care and to the love of God. And then somewhere in there was that very carefully crafted tribute by her brother. Carefully crafted because he started by talking to Diana and gradually moved to talking to her sons and then to the wider world. And I thought that that was one of the most moving things, the comprehensive prayers of the Archbishop, and then that moment when the choir came in after that with London Derriere. I mean, it was just perfectly captured everything that the Archbishop was trying to say.
Robert Lacey, I think this is the point that people are going to remember about the service, or one of the points they're going to remember about the service, the way the Earl Spencer made the point about keeping the boys, he said, duty and so on, fine, but they must also be like their mother. They must also have that touch of the ordinary person. It was quite an extraordinary and pointed point he made there.
Oh, it was a high point, and we've been searching all week for words to express what we feel, and I think if there was one set of words that did it, it was that, and I think actually his secular words, frankly, rather transcended everything else. He knows her better than anybody else. He talked about her intuition. He explained her. He told us new things. He coined these phrases like the constituency of the rejected that she represented, and then that comparison of Diana, the goddess of hunting, who herself was in fact hunted all her life. I felt I could understand that island now up in Northamptonshire where she's heading. I mean, the Spencers gave the girl to us and to the press and to the royal family. The blood family, as he called it. The blood family are taking her back.
The point about that blood family, Canon, as you were saying, is the gap is opening up, though, again. We thought when the Queen appeared and when the princes went out and talked to young people, something of a closing of ranks had been effected. But now, from what Earl Spencer said, that gap seems to have opened up again a little bit, didn't it?
I think that there were two very interesting things. The moment at which he cracked himself, that you felt that his face was expressing all the agony of the whole nation there, was the moment at which he was handing Diana on into the care and to the love of God. He actually said words very like that. But before that, what he'd done was to put a marker down. He'd actually said that the blood family would take the responsibility that Diana herself had taken for her sons in that particular area of affection and defence and so on.
It seemed aimed at the other family there.
No, I'm sorry to break in, but I wouldn't agree with that. I mean, he made an allusion to hoping the boys would sing, I think it was, or dance. He's clearly immensely proud of what the Spencers have given now, the royal family. I mean, he was talking as a great old English aristocrat, but I wouldn't interpret it as divisive in that sense.
But he was laying the marker down that they would remain with that commitment that Diana had had for her own sons, that would be part of their family responsibility.
As the little boy said, maybe he's the one who's going to take them to Thorpe Park now.
Robert Lacey, Canon Oliver, thank you very much. Let's go to join my colleague Adrian Britton now on Carriage Road. Adrian?
Yes, Trevor, what you can see behind me are the crowds who are leaving Hyde Park, having just watched that service, virtually in tearful silence, all races, creeds and ages. I saw a couple over on the lawn, arms around each other, just crying, particularly when the Elton John song was sung. And I think what everybody feels here, and that is despite the vast numbers who are here, they didn't feel as though they were attending a large-scale public solemn occasion. that because of their intense feelings towards the princess, they all felt they were attending a private funeral. Let me just turn to some of them here. So what did you think of the service?
Well, it was excellent, very good, especially Elton John song. It was very heartbreaking. And they were really well.
What did you think of the Earl Spencer's tribute?
Very good, well put together in such short time. Very good.
And they laid it to your side. Anything in particular which you found particularly moving?
Earl Spencer's speech. That was really moving, yes.
In what way?
I think what he said was exactly how Diana was. And I could understand that. And it moved me.
Let me just move to a lady at your back who are holding flowers. Presumably you're on your way to Kensington Palace.
Yes, I am. I'm on my way to Kensington Palace with some flowers and some poems that the girls at school wrote yesterday. They felt quite touched and moved by the occasion, and I brought them along today to leave them at the palace gates for Prince William and Harry.
And what did you think of the service?
I thought it was excellent. In such a short time, so many moving statements and sentiments came across. I think everyone was feeling the same, and I think what Earl Spencer said and what Elton John sang was superb.
And the lady to your left? Anything in particular which struck you? Anything particularly moving that you found?
Elton John's song. It was Elton John's song.
Elton John's song. Let's just move over here. I mean, more flowers still. I can't imagine that there is a single growing flower left in this country, having seen so many flowers this week. Anything in particular which you found moving?
The speech.
The speech?
Yeah.
You found it quite powerful?
Yeah, and the song also.
Thank you very much. Trevor, that really does sum up the expression of the intense feeling here. With that, I'll hand you back to the studio.
Thank you very much indeed. As we've been saying, the speech, perhaps by Earl Spencer, the speech would transcend a great deal of what was said and heard at that service this morning. Let's just remind ourselves again what the Earl Spencer said.
There is no doubt that she was looking for a new direction in her life at this time. She talked endlessly of getting away from England, mainly because of the treatment that she received at the hands of the newspapers. I don't think she ever understood why her genuinely good intentions were sneered at by the media, why there appeared to be a permanent quest on their behalf to bring her down. It is baffling. My own and only explanation is that genuine goodness is threatening to those at the opposite end of the moral spectrum. It is a point to remember that of all the ironies about Diana, perhaps the greatest was this: a girl given the name